Okay, we are now live on YouTube and I will be recording. I think we'll just wait one more minute to see if anybody else wants to join. We have one attendee currently, and then we can get started. All right. So welcome everyone to the Public Information Center for the proposed levels of service in the town of Saugeen Shores. Please note that attendees cannot be seen or heard during a Zoom webinar. However, you can raise your hand to indicate that you wish to contribute a point or ask a question by clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. The host will then see that you have your hand raised and can invite you to speak. During the question period, the attendees who have clicked the raise hand icon will be granted permission to be heard during the live webinar to provide their questions and/or comments. To lower your hand, click the same button once again. Please note that there is no chat feature. Comments or written questions can be sent to pic@saugeenshores.ca at the end of this session and will be responded to promptly. This session is being recorded and posted live to the Town of Saugeen Shores YouTube channel. The session is scheduled to run until 7 p.m. to allow ample time for questions and any additional comments. A copy of the presentation will also be added to the Engage site by end of day tomorrow, and additional comments can be added to the project page. The project page can be found at engage.saugeenshores.ca/LOS. Tonight, we are asking residents to provide feedback on the findings provided by Hemson Consultants with regards to the proposed levels of service and financial strategy as part of the asset management requirements as outlined by OREG 588-17. Hemson specializes in public policy advice in the areas of municipal finance, development planning, demographic and economic forecasting, and real estate valuations. At this time, I would like to introduce the team we have for the PIC this evening. To start, my name is Jessica Rogers. I'm the asset management supervisor with the town of and the project lead for this project. With me today, I have Laretha Fletcher, our GIS coordinator, Rahul Amin, the engineering manager, Mark Paoli, the Director of Development Services, and Jim, who is our Director of Corporate Services. In addition, we have our consultants, Chris Billette and Andrew Marabella from Hemson Consultants. They will provide a brief presentation and then we will open the floor for questions. At this time, I turn it over to Chris for the presentation.
Thanks, Jessica. Let me share the screen here. So just sent the request there.
Yep. Let me. Do you want to try sending it again?
Sure thing. So let me just send the screen there.
There we go.
There we go. Just maximize that. So thanks, Jessica. So I guess what we wanted to cover today as part of the Public Information Center number 2, as part of the development of the 2025 proposed level of service, we want to provide some information on the progress on the project to date, as well as some of our key findings in terms of the proposed level of service, and as well as the financial strategy and the financial results of that analysis. So we want to cover some regulatory requirements, give you a bit of a background on what those are, the level of service approach, and a snapshot of what those proposed levels of service look like. We want to then look at the town's financing strategy and kind of the resulting requirements on the cost side, as well as the financial implications of those levels of service. And we want to end it off with a bit of a group discussion with the group here. So a bit of background, the timelines and requirements are really mandated by provincial regulation, Ontario Regulation 58817, which requires municipalities to develop asset management plans as a part of their overall sort of planning exercise or financial planning exercises. And the town of Saugeen Shores, up to the 2024 requirement, has been compliant and has done an excellent job in meeting those regulatory requirements. The first three requirements, which kind of range from back in 2019 to 2024, really related to developing a strategic asset management policy. So, sort of a document that outlines the commitments on asset management sort of practices by the town. In 22, developing and the existing level of service for core assets, and in 24, the existing level of service for all asset categories. And really, the town has all that work that's been put in over the last several years to meet that regulatory requirements, helping to inform the exercise that we're presenting here today. So, as part of the 2025 requirement for July 1st, it's really developing those proposed levels of service. And the proposed level of service is really just outlining proposed targets on levels of service that the town wants to plan for related to the infrastructure over the next 10-year period. In terms of what that process looks like, a bit of an outline here of of the process so far. We undertook, along with the town, a review of the current level of service. So, looking back at all that work that was done over the past several years, and making sure that the current level of service is a good baseline to develop those targets in that second point. And what the targets are really looking at is more of a guide in order to be able to plan for infrastructure and infrastructure work over the next several years. There has been an extensive sort of series of consultations with staff, with the group here, in terms of developing those proposed levels of service. We are in the second public information center, so there's been two sessions with the public. And ultimately, after this kind of process and the input from the public and staff, we're going to be going to council in order to present the draft proposed levels of service and the key results. Importantly, we want to identify the costs to meet those proposed levels of service. We want to make sure we understand what the implications are going to be for the town over the long term, keeping with those good asset management practices and long-term financial planning. And we want to understand any risks associated with those plans. I want to emphasize that the level of service here focuses on the town's assets and infrastructure. So a lot of the focus is really on maintaining that infrastructure, any measures that will help us understand how we can do that related to the infrastructure. But we try to stay away from other levels of service, such as recreation kind of hours, or the types of library services offered at your local libraries, and so on. So really, the focus here is related to the infrastructure, the things that are in the ground, the things on the ground, and all the supporting assets needed to maintain all those sort of hard engineered services as well. Late in late 2024, the town did undertake a survey as part of that consultation process that was complementary to the first PIC that was held back then. Those survey results, about 40 respondents provided information as part of that survey, and we wanted to give you a bit of an outline of what those sort of results tell us. So, at a high level, kind of more than half of the respondents were highly satisfied or satisfied with the current level of service that the town is providing. Most respondents want to maintain or increase taxes only by inflation. So, just thinking about that financial side. The results were more supportive of maintaining the level of service while keeping tax increases to inflation or lower. So, not a surprising finding, and to the point of that, or to that last point, most respondents are looking for better value for taxes in perhaps other areas that are not necessarily related to asset management, but at the same time, as part of the asset management management exercise overall. So, I think from the perspective of our analysis in the town as well, we didn't find any substantially different responses to kind of what we already know. We want to make sure that the town is providing better value for the taxes and the property taxes that residents pay on an ongoing basis. One final point to make up with the survey is that as part of the town's commitment to undertake this asset management proposed level of service process, we want to make sure that we're considering the input from residents, and this was a good opportunity to make sure that we consider that input as part of that analysis. What you see here is a snapshot of the levels of service for the core services. So the core services really being your roads, bridges and culverts, stormwater, and water and wastewater services. And really the key result coming out of that sort of analysis is that the proposed level of service is being targeted overall to maintain that current level of service or better. So really at the end of the day, consistent with some of the findings and some of the information that was provided through those surveys results. Go through this is a snapshot of some of the key results from that level of service analysis. There are additional levels of service that are being part in being done in quite a bit of detail and will be presented to council and through our final report, but we wanted to give the group here a snapshot of what that looks like for the major pieces. For roads, the average payment condition index 85 out of 100. Overall, the current level of service very good. So the roads are in very sort of in good to very good condition, and really that target, we want to make sure that is aligned with the town's existing practices and all the good work that the town is already doing. No individual road segments less than 60 and maintaining the overall average above 85. So to be clear, the town has already looked forward in terms of the capital planning process, in terms of the practices by the town in order to make sure that we can maintain that level of service by targeting roads that are approaching sort of a lower condition. For the bridges, the percentage of bridges in the municipality with loading or dimensional restrictions, no bridges currently have loading restrictions. I will note here that there are a couple of structures that are closed to service, but those are sort of excluded from the count here. The average on the conditions of the bridges from a 0 to 100 scale is 65 out of 100, with our target really being and maintaining a minimum of 70. So in terms of that particular target, a little lower than what the sort of target suggests, but the town is already planning in terms of the works that are needed in order to get that to maintain or to reach that target over the next 10-year period. For stormwater, percentage of properties resilient to a 100-year storm, the vast majority of properties have been determined to be consistent to a 100-year storm, and as well as the second point there, the vast majority of the infrastructure is resilient to a 5-year storm as well. And we want to make sure that we're maintaining that and maintaining that resiliency over the next 10-year period. For water and wastewater, some kind of key figures here in terms of the number of boil water advisories and water main breaks for the water system. 0 have occurred over the past several years, and we want to make sure we maintain that target, making sure that all the work that's done on the system maintains that target at 0 for that. For wastewater backups or effluent violations, so sort of chemical violations to the environment, we want to make also kind of the current level of service and kind of the historical values have been 0. None of them have occurred, and we want to make sure we maintain those targets as they are. For the non-core services, so all the other assets that are not necessarily your infrastructure on the ground, so not your roads, not your bridges, but things like all the supporting infrastructure, such as the fleet and the vehicles that the town uses in order to provide those services, as well as including a snapshot of our parks and our condition of our parks and our facilities. So similar approach to the core. The level of services are focused on the condition and some operational functions. Generally, the targets, we want to make sure we're maintaining the sort of our performance today through sort of regular investment on these assets. So here's a sample of some of those kind of measures. The fleet downtime for repairs, 5 days on average. The town has been responsive in making sure that the fleet is up and running in order to provide service. The percentage of assets above good or very good condition, about 34%. Recognizing that the fleet always has, because of the short life cycle or useful life of the fleet, they're always a rolling sort of amount of vehicles that will transition from very good to fair to poor and so on throughout their life. But the town has been responsive in making sure that as the life of those vehicles comes up, the replacement of those vehicles occurs. So there's a rolling sort of number there over the years as those replacements occur. For parks, the average response time for service requests about 18 days. We want to make sure we maintain that performance overall, and the percentage of assets above good or very good condition, almost all of them in that very good to good condition, 96%, making sure that our parks are and our assets in those parks are in good condition overall. And the facilities, an average response time for service requests are about 29 days. So the town continues to be responsive to those service requests, recognizing that some service requests may take longer than others, but the town is always going forward and making sure that those are documented on an ongoing basis and the priority requests are taken up and addressed going forward. So in terms of, once again, making keeping it clear that this is sort of a snapshot of what those levels of service look like, our detailed report will provide a lot of those details and those additional levels of service through that analysis. Getting right into the sort of the financials. Really, the message here is that the town relies on tax funded to meet those long-term capital needs, to meet those proposed levels of service. So the chart here shows the forecasted tax funded contributions to reserves. So the town depends on tax funding and contributions to reserves in order to address large infrastructure projects related to the repair and replacement of that infrastructure. So what the chart shows is that there are increases to taxes that are needed to meet those proposed levels of service. In 2025, the town has committed just over $3.6 million approved by council to contributions to reserves from the tax base in order to undertake repair and replacement work. In order to meet those proposed levels of service, we need to increase that funding and rely on that tax funding over the long term. So the forecast is really showing that 3.6 million would need to increase to well over about $7 million by the end of the 10-year period to ensure that we're maintaining those levels of service and meeting those proposed levels of service sort of targets. In total, that tax funding is about $58.3 million over the 10-year period in our planning period from 2025 to 2034. Important to say here that the town does rely on tax funding, but there are additional sources of funding that the town relies on, such as upper grants from upper levels of government, such as the gas tax, such as the OCIF, and those amounts and those funds are also being used in order to address capital needs over the long term. But nevertheless, even though those funds are available, the tax base continues to be something that we need to rely on in order to maintain those levels of service. The plan will use those funds from taxation to maintain the overall asset condition in fair or better. So that's really sort of going back to our level of service table, consistent with us maintaining that level of service. So the overall replacement value of the asset portfolio of the town is about just under $880 million, and that's excluding the value of of land. So it is a significant asset portfolio, well approaching the $1 billion mark. And for the size of the town, it is quite a large replacement value, but nevertheless, it's needed in order to be able to provide services. About a quarter, 206 million in assets are in fair condition or lower, so that's about a quarter of the assets. But that means that three-quarters of them are in good to very good condition. So it is overall a very good news story for the town. That said, that quarter, the $206 million, we are going to need funds in order to be able to make sure that infrastructure doesn't to continue to deteriorate sort of over time. So the $58.3 million in tax funding from the previous slide is proposed to be used for assets in fair condition and worse. And the reason I say fair condition and worse, the assets in poor, very poor are clear that they're older assets. They may need to be addressed, but the assets in fair condition, we tend to think of that infrastructure as transitioning into the poor, very poor over the short to medium term. So we can't just let those assets go and think that we can just leave them sort of in the ground and that they will be okay. We want to make sure we monitor the fair infrastructure very closely to make sure it doesn't transition into the poor, very poor, and sort of those levels of service drop. Changes in taxation do have a direct impact on the available funding. And I think what we want to make clear here is it's sort of we ran a couple scenarios to help understand what that means in terms of that available tax funding. So the middle bar really represents that base case, what we showed in the last couple slides, 58.3 million in tax funding available to undertake infrastructure repair and replacement work or state of good repair over the next 10 years. If we were to reduce that 50, the sort of the funding available over that next 10-year period, and if we reduce that increased funding by about 50%, it would leave us with a gap or sort of a shortfall of about $10.7 million. So we'd only have $47.6 million to address additional infrastructure needs. So you can see that there's a quite a big sort of shift in terms of how much funding would be available if we were to reduce that funding by 50%. If those increases were to be increased by 50%, so sort of on the other way, we'd have an additional $10.7 million more in funding in order to be able to undertake sort of capital works. Our base case represents a tax levy increase of about 2%, but that is related solely to capital works and the needs of the fair and from fair, poor, and very poor assets in the previous slide. The sort of the increased funding will represent a tax levy increase for capital alone of about 3%, whereas the decreased funding represents a tax levy increase of 1%. So you can see the range of increases and how much of the in dollars that yields or takes away in terms of our sort of our tax revenue going forward. Changes to the taxation rates have direct impacts, not just to sort of obviously the financials, but also the infrastructure on the ground. To put that into context, sort of a couple examples here. On the roads and related infrastructure, about 16.7 million are in that fair or lower condition, so in fair, poor, or very poor. If we were to provide an additional $10 million from the tax levy, like we saw in the previous slide, that we would be able to address about about $10 million in that infrastructure. It would leave us with about 6.7 million in fair or lower condition road assets over that 10-year period. So even though we've added additional funds, there would still be a bit of a gap in order to address all that infrastructure over time. But nevertheless, would be a significant improvement to the conditions that we see sort of in the previous graph and today. For parks, about $3.9 million of the park infrastructures are considered in fair or lower condition. An additional $10 million into the tax levy would actually address all the immediate needs for parks if hypothetically we were to undertake all that funding for those assets. Another context here, the bridges and culverts in fair or lower condition, about $9 million. An additional $10 million in funding from the tax levy would address all those immediate needs as well. So, sort of to give you a perspective of what the conditions of those assets look like and what a poor condition asset looks like and what a good condition sort of asset looks like as well. It's key for us to emphasize that this is the projection based on the analysis. Ultimately, it is up to council to decide on how they will prioritize this infrastructure and make the decisions sort of going forward on how to address sort of those assets. So that's one of the key things that we want to sort of mention here. So with that said, that kind of brings us to the sort of the end of the formal presentation. We do have some questions to help guide perhaps some of the topics here and answer some questions from attendees today. Just to read some of these out, just to help guide the conversation. Would you support additional funding for capital to ensure the town can repair or replace current infrastructure in poor condition? Would you be in support in additional funding for capital to ensure the town can save for the future and repair and replace infrastructure once it reaches poor condition? So kind of two components there, addressing the immediate needs and also creating savings for the future. And obviously as well, if there are any other comments or questions that you'd like to bring up to the town's attention, we'd be happy to address them. We'd be happy to answer your questions and concerns sort of here today. So thank you for that. That's the sort of the formal presentation, and I'll pass it back to Jessica.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Great presentation. So we've only got one attendee on the webinar right now. So Francis, I don't know if you have any questions or comments for us at this time. If you do, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll take you off mute. Okay, do we have any other comments or anything from any of the panelists on the call this evening?
Not from the Hemson side, no. I was just
Perfect,
looking at the rest of the team here if they had any comments.
perfect. No, I think we're good. Okay, well, in that case, I would like to thank our consultants, Andrew and Chris, for the presentation today. I will also remind everyone that this presentation is available on the town's YouTube channel, and that a copy of the presentation will also be made available on our Engage site tomorrow. And again, that website is engage.saugeenshores.ca/LOS. And Francis, I actually see you've got a question.
Are you,
Yep, go ahead.
are you disappointed that I in fact am the only one, or do you take this to be that people are satisfied? Is it an issue that people are even aware of?
I would like to take it as a good sign that everybody's satisfied with our work. I know that there's been a number of PICs running recently, so that people get very involved in. So maybe this is just one they decided that they were good with the content and didn't feel the need to attend. Anything else before we conclude this evening? Yes, go ahead, Francis.
I was just going to say thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate you attending today. Perfect. Well, if that's everything, I will go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.